Real World Wildlife Products is not just a food plot seed company. We realize to get the most out of your properties, you have to have quality habitat. A habitat is an important part of the puzzle. Don't misunderstand me, food plots are important, but a good quality habitat is just as important.
Often when I'm giving seminars, I tell people that if they want to consistently kill big bucks, they've got to hunt those bucks where they spend their daylight hours. I've found there's no quicker way to develop quality bedding cover than by planting warm season native grasses. But the thing is, not all native grasses are created equal. Real World Wildlife Seed created a blend we call Bedding in a Bag, which is a blend of 3 different native grasses: big blue stem, Indian grass, and switchgrass. But what's more important than the 3 species of grass in the blend is the individual varieties of those 3 species. So what we did at Real World Wildlife Seed is we got our hands on every one of the different varieties of these 3 species as we could. And then we selected the ones that had the best standability and put those in our Bedding in a Bag blend. Standability means that these grasses will stand in high winds and snow cover, different conditions that'll knock a lot of grasses flat to the ground. Now, I'm not saying that these grasses will withstand anything and still stand. A lot of times we get a heavy snow that knocks these grasses down, but once that snow melts, they'll pop right back up and once again be providing cover. Some of the other grasses that we've tested simply don't do that. Once they're knocked flat to the ground, they stay there. But our Bedding in a Bag blend, we've proven time after time where even in March, long after the winter's over, these grasses are still providing cover, not only for deer, but other wildlife, pheasants, quail, rabbits, you name it, they love to bed in these grasses.
Another thing these grasses do is I live in an area that's a lot of ag, and during the early season, everybody's always talking about all the big bucks are hiding in the cornfields. Those deer can relate to different type of cover as a cornfield and no human scent, no pressure in there. But once those cornfields are harvested, they go back to the hardwoods. These bedding grasses are a different type of cover that a deer can relate to as safety, and they can treat that just like a cornfield. And these native grasses, if maintained and mowed and burned off properly, they can last for 20, 30 years. The deer can have a good sanctuary to come back to year after year.
There are a couple things to keep in mind when establishing a Bedding in a Bag plot. First of all is site prep. You need to kill all the vegetation and especially cool season grasses. Sometimes this is going to require 2 herbicide applications several weeks apart. If there's any vegetation left, especially grasses, those grasses are going to come back and dominate your stand and eventually choke out any of the warm season grasses in your Bedding in a Bag. When you've got your plot sprayed and you're ready to plant your Bedding in a Bag blend, there's really 2 ways to do it. My preferred method is with a no-till native grass drill. A lot of times you can rent one of these from your local soil and water district. If a no-till drill is not an option for you, you can also work the soil and broadcast the native grass seed right on top of the soil and then run a cultipacker or a roller over it to push that seed in the ground. Now, one thing I will caution you about is this native grass seed is fluffy and it doesn't want to flow through a broadcast seeder very well. But what you can do is get some pelletized lime and mix this seed in with the pelletized lime so that it'll flow better through your broadcast seeder. And then just spread the lime with the seed, then come in with your cultipacker or your roller and push that seed into the ground. Planting depth is critical. You want these seeds no more than a 1/4 inch deep. 1/8 of an inch is better. A 1/2 inch is way too deep.
You can plant this Bedding in a Bag anytime the soil conditions are optimal for planting. But once you do, the native grass seed or this Bedding in a Bag blend needs a 60-degree ground temperature for up to 60 days. So my recommendation for you is once you plant this is to have patience, and go get some more patience. Because if you were to plant a row of corn, a row of soybeans, and a row of native grasses side by side, what you would see is 30 days later, the native grasses or the Bedding in a Bag would be about a 1-inch tall, green hair looking plant coming out of the ground. Your corn and your soybeans will be 8, 10, 12 inches tall. However, if you're to pull each of those plants out of the ground, all the way to the end of the roots and flip them upside down, you will see that the native grasses has a 5 or 6 or 7 inch root on it. That plant builds a big root before the plant starts to emerge through the ground. That's why it can accelerate its growth so fast during the summertime and still grow rapidly during dry spells during July and August. But your corn and bean plants, however, are only going to have a 2 or 3 inch root on them because they've put a big plant on above the ground. So remember, once you plant it, give yourself about 30 days before you start looking at your plot for the native grasses to start appearing. They're putting on a big root, they're working, they're just not above the ground yet.
Since native grasses are so slow to germinate and establish, they are very susceptible to weed competition. So it's very critical that you control the weeds in these native grass plantings. There's a couple of ways to go about it. You can mow, but when you do mow, you want to make sure you keep that mower about a foot off the ground. You don't want to chop these new grasses down an inch or two off the ground. Make sure you keep that mower up about 12 inches from the ground. The other way is with herbicide. And you don't want to spray too quick, but once the grasses are about a foot tall, you can spray your native grass planting with a chemical called 2,4-D. 2,4-D is a herbicide that will kill any broadleaf, but will not affect any grass. You could spray it in your yard and it would kill the clover and dandelions in your yard but not hurt your grass. And it's the same way in your native grass planting. It'll kill all those broadleaf weeds out there but not hurt your grasses at all. But the key is to let those grasses get up a little bit. They can be susceptible if they're just a couple inches out of the ground and you spray them with that 2,4-D. So let them get about a foot or so tall before you do spray.
This bay in a bag is the native grasses, they're a perennial. So once you maintain them properly, they'll last you several years. A good way to maintain them is every other year, after the second or third year, do a burn on them. That burning does a couple things. It stimulates the growth of the native grass. It gets rid of a lot of thatch in the ground. And also on the small trees, it'll burn the cambium layer, which holds the sap in around the trees and kills most trees in those areas, keeping your plot nice and just grasses and not trees.
Keep in mind that these bedding in a bag grasses are going to require more patience than your typical food plot. Typically, it's going to take you about 3 years to get a really good stand of these grasses. Now, the first year what you get is going to be dependent on the weather. I've seen them get up to 6 foot tall and even a little bit taller, but the stand itself is not really thick. Typically, on average, first year you can expect anything from knee high to about shoulder high, but a pretty thin stand. The second year it should be a whole lot better, especially if you've controlled the weeds. It ought to be up in the 6 foot range. But the third year is when it's really going to shine. If you'll burn it off, as Kevin has suggested, that third spring, it'll just take off and you should have 8 foot grasses by fall.
Now I know if you're like me and the third year my plot was up, I couldn't think about burning it and starting all over, but I will assure you that when you burn these grasses off, it stimulates the growth and they'll be back thicker and taller the next year. The other thing, by then your wildlife have learned where that good habitat area is. But burning the third year and then every other year after will definitely give you a good plot for years to come.
A good burn on these grasses is critical to your stand, and the best time to do it is as early in the spring as possible. As long as it's dry and you can get that fire going, be sure and watch the wind, then you're good to go.